This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good morning, everyone. B'shus, Rosh Yeshiva, Rebbeim. First of all, I want to wish you all an easy Tanis. It's 31 years since Rav Moshe passed away. His 31st Yartzeit. That means that you only heard about Rav Moshe by reputation. It's already that if I mention Rav Moshe, people ask me if I mean Rav Moshe Wolfson or Rav Moshe Sternbach. And people don't even really register Rav Moshe. You have to understand that Rav Moshe was who everyone listened to. There was no Erev in Borough Park because Rav Moshe said you shouldn't carry in Borough Park. So when Rav Moshe said you shouldn't carry in Borough Park, so Ger and Bobav, and it made no difference. Rav Moshe said it. The whole world listened to Rav Moshe. His authority that earned him the title Rash Bahag, Rosh Kol B'nei Hagoyla, was absolute. Rav Moshe was born in Russia, and he was a Rav in a very small place called Luban, a very small town called Luban. And he was living under the NKVD, the Russians that wanted to stamp out Yiddishkeit. And to give you an appreciation of what it meant to live under the Russians, I'll tell you a story. About 45 years ago, there was a big scandal in the tefillin market. You see, tefillin, it's a halacha Moshe Sinai, has to be sewn with gidin, with the sinew of the animal. Gidin are expensive, and it's an expensive process. So there was some tefillin makers who took a shortcut, and instead of using it, they used glue. And they made the tefillin puzzle. It's not detectable, but the tefillin were puzzle. And the scandal broke out, and people found out, 50-year-old people found out, that they never wore tefillin that was kosher once in their lives. Imagine putting on tefillin every day. And they found out that they never wore a kosher pair of tefillin since their bar mitzvah. People broke out crying. People were very shaken up. And I remember it was a Chanukah Masiba, and we asked Rav Moshe at the time why Hashem would do that to people. People want to do a mitzvah, they go out, they spend a lot of money on tefillin, and so Rav Moshe made that the subject of the Chanukah Masiba. And he asked a question, and he answered that people think that when they do a mitzvah, they deserve a pat on the back. You're such a good boy. You did a mitzvah. You're such a tzaddik. He says, we don't realize that we have to daven to Hashem for the privilege to do His mitzvahs. I mean, the mitzvahs, they make our life full of chayim. They give us chayei netzach, chayei olam haba. We have to daven to Hashem for the schus to do His mitzvahs. Not to take them for granted. Now, perhaps it took me 25 years to realize where this hashkafa came from. The Moshe has a son, we all know, in Staten Island, Feinstein, and he has an older son who is the Pesach Hador in America, David Feinstein. David is 11 years older than Rebbi. There is nobody in between David and Rebbi. There are other children, but there is nobody in between. There was an 11-year gap between Rebbi Feinstein and David Feinstein. Why is that? Because for 11 years they didn't have a mikveh in Russia. They didn't have a mikveh. Until Rav Moshe figured out a way to make the communal bathhouse into a kosher mikveh right under the eyes of the Russians. But for 11 years, they didn't have the ability to have a mikveh. And when you live under such harsh laws, you appreciate what it means to do a mitzvah. And what makes a Rav Moshe is the person that can live without a mikveh and live religiously for 11 years. What catapulted Rav Moshe into world fame, world recognition? In 1937, Rav Moshe came to America. He came to America, he lived here, and then in about 1946, 1947, the first of hundreds and hundreds of women started coming from the Sheiras HaPleita, started coming from Europe, and they didn't know what happened to their husbands. Their husbands were last seen in a deportation to Auschwitz, to Bergen-Belsen, to Sobobar, to Dachau, to Treblinka, to Theresienstadt, and they never were heard of again. And the women wanted to know if they're allowed to remarry. Because if their husbands are alive, they're an Ashes Ish. If they marry somebody else and their husband comes back, the child is a mamzer. A mamzer who would never be able to marry a regular girl or a regular boy. It's a dreadful thing. When these women came back, no Rav wanted to paskin for them. It's a very frightening thing. It's a tremendous advice. It's a tremendous responsibility, because if they make a mistake and the husband turns back, he was in a camp and he got lost, and he was in a DP camp, and he ended up in Belgium, he ended up in Japan, and he comes back 2 years later, and the Rav paskin that the wife could remarry, it would be a tragedy. So Rav Moshe said, Rav Moshe had a heart full of chesed. He said, if nobody's going to take care of these women, then I have to take care of them. He would go on to paskin on 2,000 women. 2,000 women. Most of them he allowed to remarry and went on to have huge families. Never once did a husband come back alive. You have to understand that Rav Moshe didn't allow all the women to remarry. And those that he didn't allow to remarry, their husbands a lot of times came back alive. But not one of the women that Rav Moshe permitted to remarry, the husband came back afterwards. Not one. This catapulted Rav Moshe into world recognition. When I was sitting shiva for my first Rebbitzin in Liba Aleh Shalom, one of the Gaboyim of Rav Elyashiv came to be Menachem Avel. This is after Rav Elyashiv already passed away. And he came, he happened to be here, he heard about my Rebbitzin, so he came to be Menachem Avel. So I asked him if two stories were true. The first story is that I heard that three great Gadol Hador from Eretz Yisrael had a shaila about a woman remarrying, and they couldn't come to a conclusion. So they decided to call America to Rav Moshe. And Rav Moshe gave them an answer on the spot. And after they got off the phone, these three Gedolim did a rikud, did a dance, that there's somebody in the world like Rav Moshe. The three Gedolim, he confirmed to me, the three Gedolim were Rav Yoshev, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, and Rav Avadia Yosef. That's the first thing I asked him. The second thing I asked him is that Rav Yoshev never wrote Svarim of his own. People wrote a lot from Rav Yoshev, but he never wrote Svarim on his own. And they asked him why. So I had heard that Rav Yoshev said, "What do you think, I'm a Rav Moshe that could just write?" So he said to me, "It's true," he said that. And he also said that he couldn't take himself away from the Gemara to write. That's also what he said. Now, when we hear as Bachrim such stories, we say, okay, doesn't seem to be that this stuff has anything to do with me. You know, they say over, Rabbi Franz said by the Siyam HaShas, not this Siyam HaShas, not the last Siyam HaShas, 2 Siyam HaShases ago. It's a little bit controversial, but it's in the Mechitzasam, and Rav Franz said it, that Rav Moshe made 2 Siyams of 101 time finishing Shas. Not once, but twice. Twice he finished Shas 101 times. That's we're welcome to a shiva. So Bachram will listen to this, and they'll say, "What does this have to do with me?" It's like a different world, a different planet. I'm happy that I make a siyum on one Masechta, and he's making a siyum on finishing Shas 101 times. You know, it's so. Let me tell you how I got to know. I was younger than you. I came to the Yeshiva of Staten Island in 1969. I had just gotten bar mitzvah, and in the Beis Medrash comes in this little man who I knew to be the Gadol Hador. And I felt such a magnetism. But when I was 13 years old, I didn't understand. I didn't grasp the enormity of his knowledge. I'll tell you something happened when I was 17 years old. Already when I was 17 years old, I was already a bona fide Ben Torah and had learned quite a few Masechtas. But it was in the summer, and Rav Moshe had just gotten a package from Russia. And it was all covered up with all kinds of seals and insurances. And he was opening up it with great excitement. And I asked him what's inside. And he says they found a notebook of his that he wrote on Yerushalmi Demai. So here I am. I'm a little embarrassed now. But I asked him with all of my naive 17-year-old understanding if he only wrote on those Masechtas of Yerushalmi that don't have Bavli. Demai doesn't have Bavli as Yerushalmi, so I figured he wrote on the Masechtas of Yerushalmi that don't have Bavli. So remember, I'm 17 years old. He looked at me without Masiach Lefi Tumah, without registering any. He said when he was already my age, he wrote already on Yerushalmi Bava Kama Bava Metzia Bava Basra. Yeah, that's me. That happened to me. There are stories in the book that don't have my name in it, but that happened to me. How did I get? I got to be Mishamish Rav Moshe for 10 years. Just want to show you things in life that you do when you're your age, and things in life that you are moister nefesh for. You get rewards later on in life. For example, I have now on Kol HaLoshen, and it's being transferred slowly now, already over half of Shas on TorahAnytime.com. I have Shas Mishnayos. Besides Shas, I have Shas Mishnayos. What I did is for 6 years, I recorded 2 Mishnayos a day. And I didn't, with the help of Hashem, I didn't miss once in 6 years. I recorded 2 Mishnayos every day. So I have all the hard Mesechtos, Negoim, Olos, Kloyim, all the hard Mesechtos. And it was a superhuman effort. And at that time, a good 2 years of it, my Rebbitzin was very, very sick. And I recorded sometimes from the hospital. And it was like there was a super siyata d'shmaya. And I feel it's because I always brought Rav Moshe his Mishnayos. Rav Moshe would always, he never wasted a minute from not learning. So when he was wrapping up his tefillin, he would have a Mishnayos, and he would learn continuously Mishnayos. Many photographers have pictures of him learning Mishnayos while he's wrapping his tefillin, while he was waiting. If, let's say, there was a bris in the yeshiva, and they were waiting for the bris to get ready, he was sitting and learning straight Mishnayos. Now that's so I always brought in Mishnayos, and just for that alone, I think I had this here later on in life. So it's a big lesson. What we do rewards us. You don't realize what you do now rewards you throughout life. But when I was 13 years old, I didn't appreciate the goyim that Rav Moshe was. But what did I appreciate? Rav Moshe was an amazingly warm person. He never shook your hand. He took both your hands, he took your hand in both his hands and gave it a hug, a literal hug. When we say that the Torah is Eish, Miyamino, Eish das lamay, from his right hand is a fiery law to his people. We understand that to mean that the Torah illuminates the darkness of this world. This world is dark and the Torah lights it up. That's true. But that's only part of it. It's also that the Torah is warm. Rav Moshe taught us to be warm to people, to care about them. This man whose head was on every different Maimer Chazal, he had analyzed and explained it in different ways, explaining different ways how to look at everything. His head was full of Torah and yet, when he saw the guy in the yeshiva in broken English, he thanked the guy for keeping his yeshiva clean. He made a special trip down 2 flights on Shavuos to go into the kitchen to thank Mr. Yeager, the cook, for the homemade pollenchit, the homemade blintzes that he made, and told them, you should know your delicious blintzes caused the boys to learn so good this Shavuos. he was busy writing tshuvas about heart transplants for all over the world, but that didn't stop him for translating a letter in Russian for a neighbor on the east side, or calming somebody, a mentally disturbed person, because he thought he saw flying saucers. And he had all the time in the world for it. You saw by Moshe Torah greatness, but derech eretz kodma laTorah. You saw warmth, sensitivity, caring. We had fahers from Moshe. Imagine what it would be like to be fahered from Moshe. But Moshe never asked a bacher straight the question. Never risked embarrassing a bacher. So Moshe asked the questions, and the bachrim that knew their answers raised their hands. No, but it's important to understand the idea of the tzidkis of the Gadol Hador. Moshe had phlebitis. We call it today cellulitis or roiza. And he was in bed. Now, what most people saw Moshe is that when he had time, he was learning Mishnayos, but that's not what he did when he was waiting for a car or waiting for the Rebbitzin or in between one wedding and another. You have to understand that on a regular day, Moshe would go to like 2 brisin in the morning, a levaya during the day, and then 4 weddings in the night. Moshe, they used to, in my day, people didn't have, like today, chuppahs, Kabbalah's Panim 6:30, chuppah 7:30. The chuppah and the Kabbalah's Panim was calculated when Moshe could get there. So one chuppah was 7:30, one chuppah was 8:15, one chuppah was 9. It depended, and Moshe would go from one chuppah to another. And if he got there and he had to wait, so he would have a black tanach. It was actually a Koran tanach, which he inherited from his son-in-law, Rav Shishkel, who was a big, Moshe called him a malach, who passed away. And he would learn this black tanach, didn't even have Rashi. It was the whole tanach, from Bereshis all the way to Chag Zechariah Malachi, and he would learn it straight. You had to see him learn it straight. He would go straight through Daniel, straight through Amos, straight through Habakkuk. He would just go straight. He would learn straight. And he was in bed, and I brought him lunch in bed. And he turned to me and he said to me that he's mesupik if he's having Yisurin Shel Abba. Gemara Bracha says there's such a thing called Yisurin Shel Abba, chastisements of love, which a person doesn't deserve, but Hashem gives him extra suffering so that when he does the mitzvah, it's even a greater schar because of Fum Tzara Agra, and he'll get more Olam Abba. But the Gemara says that before something could be classified as Yisurin Shel Abba, there can't be any bittul Torah. Because if Hashem wouldn't cause suffering of love, it would cause people bittul Torah. So Moshe was in bed and he said to me he's in doubt whether he's having Yisurin Shel Abba. So of course I didn't say anything. Kept my mouth quiet. And he explained to me that the Gemara says that it's only if there's no bittul Torah. He showed me the Tanakh that he's learning Torah. So there's no bittul Torah. But on the other hand, he said that, it's not the Ika learning of Asuke Shmaitz Ali B'Dilkasa. So maybe it is bittul Torah. Okay. I have told this story to quite a few Gedolei Yisrael. Because you see, you have to know the beginning of the Gemara. I know the beginning of the Gemara. The Gemara says, Imrayin Adam Shi Yisurin Born Olav. If somebody sees that they're having suffering, Lo Yaleinu, Pish Peish B'Masav. Look at your deeds. Pish peish v'loy matzah. If you looked at your deeds and you can't figure out any reason why you should have suffering, yitle b'bittul Torah. If you can't figure out any bittul Torah, then be a doer sheyisurin shalab. So it means that when Moshe had the cellulitis, he already looked at his life and he felt he had no sins. The only question was, is it considered bittul Torah? I remember one summer day, Moshe had back pains, bad back pains. So there was an old doctor, I think his name was Dr. Applegrad, he's not alive anymore. There's an old doctor that they called over to see the Yeshiva, and he examined him very carefully. And he said he doesn't see anything wrong except that the Yeshiva has a mosquito bite on his back. So Rav Moshe said that's what it is. He hasn't had a mosquito bite in 70 years. Now, if you knew what Camp Westmount was like, you would know it's impossible to go there 70 minutes without a mosquito bite. But he was there for decades. He never had a mosquito bite. And then he surmised, why did he get the mosquito bite? Because many years before, when he was in Cheder, and the Rebbi asked the question, so somebody gave an answer. And then he gave an answer which the Rebbe felt was a better answer. And Rav Moshe said he felt good, and maybe that's miskabeid b'kloin chaveira. He felt good at somebody else's cost. So 70 years later, he's getting a mosquito bite for that which he did all those years before. That means he couldn't find anything else in the middle. So once again, you'll say, Rabbi Weiss, why am I even listening to this? One of the reasons is because if you think about who are the role models by the Goyim, and you should know who are our role models. These are our role models. Also, they ask, why do we have to know? Tonight in the Megillah, we're going to hear all about the trappings of Achashverosh's palace. What do I need to know about his curtains and his floor? What do I have to know about his gem-studded floor? And what do I have to know about? So the Vilna Gaon says, it's in order that we should have a vision of what Olam Haba is going to be like. Because Yafa Shah Achas in Olam Haba Mikol Chai Olam Hazeh. It says, Im la'oivrei ritzaynai kach la'oisei ritzaynai alachas kama v'kam. I remember my wife, Shashi, and I just went to London. I said 18 shiurim in London, and I went with her. In between, we went a little bit to see London, so I took her to see Windsor Castle. It's a magnificent castle, one of the great castles that still survive from the time of the Russia King Henry VIII. And I remember thinking, King Henry VIII killed a lot of wives. He was like a little Achashverosh, right? And I remember thinking, Im la'ovrei ritzaynai la'oisei ritzaynai alachas kama v'kama. The Rebbeinu Shalom gives us visions that we should know what to aspire to, even if we could only accomplish it a little bit. It's like Rav Miller asked a very simple question. He says, why, if you go to a observatory and you look through a nuclear telescope, you'll see that there are solar systems beyond our solar system that are hundreds of millions of light years away. It's impossible for us to ever get there. Now we know from our learning, Bereshis, B'Shvil Yisrael, Shenikra Bereshis, that everything was created for Klal Yisrael. So why did Hashem make worlds that we'll never be able to get to? Hundreds of millions of light years away. For what purpose? So Ramila said it's in order to give us a vision of how grand Hashem is. Because if you only had a ceiling on top of you, then you would think Hashem is a little big. When you see things of hundreds of millions, that's the meaning of Su'ei Nechem L'Marayin U'Re'umi Bara'ela. I'm going to tell you a story to show how Hashem protects those that love Him. But Moshe told me that when he was in Luban, because 135, Moshe told me that when he was in Luban, he was harassed by the NKVD, by the Bolsheviks. He was the religious leader, and they didn't want religion. So he said the first thing they did is they took away his house. Imagine somebody taking away your house. So what did he do? His shul had a guest room, an oirich room. So he and his wife and his children moved into the guest room. That was their house. Then they took away the shul. Now what did he do? So the Russians couldn't leave him homeless on the park bench. So in those days there was a law that you had to give a tax of your house to the Russians, so that if the soldiers come, they put them in that section of your house. They could store things. So they gave him the tax of a rich Jew's house. He said living with somebody else, and he's the Rav, it made it impossible. He decided he had to go to America. But in order to go to America, you needed a visa. In order to get a visa, you had to go to Moscow. In order to go to Moscow, you had to have a Jew pass. But it is impossible to get a Jew pass. So Moshe smuggled himself into Moscow. And while people were getting him the proper visa for his family, he said he went to the Beis Medrash in Moscow, and he mixed in the Beis Medrash and learned the whole day. And he stayed by these very nice goyim. And he said the whole day he sat and he learned. He even has I saw Kedushim that he wrote while he was hiding in Moscow. He learned all that. So one night he got so orangutan in his learning, he looked up, it was after midnight. And he didn't think it was right to come back home because the goyim was so nice, he didn't think it was right to risk waking them up. So he slept that night in shul. He said, Pum der Nacht. That night, the NKVD came around inspecting. If he would have been home, he would have been caught. There would be no Ramosha. I served Ramosha for 10 years. During those 10 years, I never saw him not learning. Unless he was talking to the Bachrim, unless he was helping his wife for Shabbos, he was always learning. He was always learning. I saw absolute hasmada. He was always learning. But that never stopped him from having a smile, from understanding others. I remember there was a man that was in the yeshiva who was unbalanced. He was unbalanced. He wasn't well. His name was Meshulam. And here we were learning morning Seder in yeshiva. Imagine a morning Seder in yeshiva. And in the middle of morning Seder, 10:30, Meshulam walks into the Beis Medrash and start saying a Hoichish Mein Esrei. Middle of morning, said. I thought Rav Weiss, the Mashgiach, the Langazund, would mamish faint. But Rav Moshe was sitting there. Rav Moshe sits there, nobody does anything. When Mishulm got up to Kedusha, Rav Moshe quietly stood up and said Kedusha. And everybody in the yeshiva said a Kedusha, 10:30. I wonder if anybody remembers this, Maisa. 10:30 in the morning, in the middle of the morning, and Rav Moshe taught us all how to tolerate a mentally disturbed person. It's almost mincha, but I'm gonna conclude, and you must understand what I'm telling you is nothing. It's nothing of this great man and all of the things that he did. But I'll tell you a story, a personal story that I remember. Ramesh came in, when Ramesh was in the yeshiva, especially if it was a Rosh Hashanah, it says that the Asara Rishonim get everybody's schar. The first 10 people that are in the base managed get everybody's, they don't take it away from you, but they get everybody in shul. From the Asara Rishonim, not Neitel Schar Kulam. I remember that when it was a Rosh Hashanah, Ramesh came into the base manager about 4:30 in the morning. And people would be already up at 4 o'clock in the morning to be from the Asara Rishonim, so that they should get the schar of Rav Moshe. There would be already 4 o'clock in the morning, people vying, dashing in to be from the first 10. Anyway, Rav Moshe was in the base medrash, and when he had the phlebitis, so he allowed me to put a milk crate under his foot because it had to be elevated. But he told me that I should remove it when the Bachrim start coming in. He never wanted to worry anybody. So I'm sitting learning something. Ramosha calls me over. Was meint kasher im levaveinu? No idea what he's talking about. He said to me again, Was meint kasher im levaveinu? Now, he would never embarrass me, but he was sure that I would know what he was talking about. Well, I had no clue. So he calls me over with a smile, opens a siddur. Before we put on the tefillah in the morning, we say the tefillah, and in that tefillah it says, "V'yanichenu la'avodas Hashem kasher im levaveinu." Hashem should allow us to serve Him like is in our hearts. So Rav Moshe asked me, "Unsere hearts are so groß, are our hearts so big that we ask Hashem that we should serve Him like it's in our hearts? Why don't we say, Hashem, help me serve you the right way?" He says, that's a raya to the Rambam Shita of Kaifin Isayat Shigayim Reitzani. That if somebody is not doing the right thing, we beat him until he does the right thing. What does it help if he says Reitzani? You're forcing him to say it. So Rambam says, no, he really wants to do it. Because Elikim Boras Adam Yosher. Ramosha said, we ask Hashem, our hearts have all the right information. It's just we mess ourselves up. We mess ourselves up by the media. We mess ourselves up with what we read. We mess ourselves up by the sviva. The Yetzer Hara messes us up. But internally, we have the internal compass. We have the goods in our hearts to do everything what is right. Elikim Boras Adam Yosher. It says that when we speak from a tzaddik, Sibsais of Doivois Bekever, his lips move in the kever, which is a schus for the Rosh Hashiva, and therefore the Rosh Hashiva who has such a love. Can I tell them one more thing? Huh? One more thing. You know, Ramosha's Igros Moshe is known throughout the world. Rav Moshe's psakim are laced with kindness. I'll give you an example. Rav Moshe Paskins, we know that in our Kriya Shema we're supposed to separate the letters of words that begin and end with the same letter, like Al Levavchem. So if you don't separate it, it will sound like one word, Al Levavchem. It's supposed to be two words. So you're supposed to pause. Al Lavavcha. Right? There are a lot of examples of words like that end and begin in the same letter. So they asked Moshe, what if a person didn't pause? Does that mean he's not Mekayim Kriyishma D'Oraisa? So Moshe said in Resectus Nedarim, it says, Kinoi Nedarim ki Nedarim. Substitute Nedarim are like Nedarim. There's a machlokes in the Gemara, what are substitute Nedarim? What are Kinoi Nedarim? One Mandiyama says it's a Lashon Nachrim. So instead of saying Kainam, which is a carbon, Kikazel like a carbon, you say Kainam, Kainaf, Kainas. It's a Lashon Nachrim. And one holds it's a Lashon Shabadu Chacham. It's a code that the Chacham made. That's not the Ger, that's Reish Lakish. So the Ran says, what's the Chiddush of Kinei Nedarim? It says Nedarim Nemarim B'chol Lashon. Well, what's the big Chiddush? Lashon Nachrim. So the Ran says, even slang, a Lashon Shibush, a dialect, a slang, like ain't this nice? So Ran says that people, they couldn't pronounce carbon, so they said koinam, and it became a slang. And Lashon Shibush is also a Lashon. Says Rishiva. So you see, if it's something that a lot of people say, it becomes a language. A lot of people say Kriya Shema fast. So Al Ravkan becomes a language. And therefore he paskins that you yikes the Kriya Shema. What do we see from that? That's a psak laced with chesed. Because it didn't sit well from Rav Moshe that hundreds of people should not be Mekayim Kriya Shema D'Oraisa just because they're saying it fast. That's a psak. Of course, there's a psak based on halacha, but laced with kindness. That kindness that allowed him to paskin for 2,000 women to remarry. That's Torah's chesed. So that Torah's chesed, I'm sure, the Rosh Shiva will be a Meilitz Yosher. Meilitz Yosher for us, that we should learn good, be Yari Shemayim, have good friends, be happy in our learning. You should know that there's a big difference when you're happy in your learning. You're happy in your learning, that's why we daven every day. Harevna Hashem Elokeinu. Let it be sweet, as Divrei Serascha B'finu. That simcha in learning, when you learn with simcha, you know what Rav Moshe said? Rav Moshe said that an ovel, a mourner, is allowed to drink wine. Only an oinen is not allowed to drink wine before they bury the person. But an ovel is allowed to drink wine. Even though it says, Yayin Yisamach Levav Enesh. But an ovel is not allowed to learn Torah. Pikudei Hashem Yesharim Mesamchilei. From that, Rav Moshe proved that learning Torah is even more simcha than drinking wine. It's an amazing thing. He says that's a simcha of the neshama. May we be zeicha all to have such simcha and to have a freilich and Purim. By the way, nobody should put a cigarette in their mouth on Purim. That's an incredibly stupid thing to do. I don't think there's any stupid people there. The Cancer Institute says that you could get hooked from one cigarette. The 32 sessions that I took my Rebbitzin Aleh Shalom to chemo labs, I saw a lot of people in the chemo labs suffering on chemo, on drips for 7 hours, coughing and dying because they smoked. I had a Talmud, his name was Yerachmiel Goldstein, Zechet Tzadik L'Bracha, who had a lung disease from smoking. He was a Korean vet, so the Veterans Hospital offered him new lungs. but he had to be smoke-free for 3 months. And every time he went for a blood test, they told him he wasn't smoke-free. And he did everything he could to stop. He took shots in the neck. At the end, he died because he couldn't get new lungs, because he couldn't stop smoking. And before he died, he begged me, Rabbi Weiss, you speak to a lot of young people. Tell them that they shouldn't be stupid enough to smoke. He said, I want to live, and I can't stop. I want to live. And he died young. It's really not a smart thing to do. And I teach for 35 years. I taught seminary. And 34 years. And I know from the girls, they're not anxious to marry smokers. They're not. They're not even interested that their sheitlach should smell from smoke. They're just not. They don't want it. So it's a lose situation. Thank you, and have a wonderful Purim.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.